An $80 million private jet. 6 days. Hundreds of the world's top engineers. Zero answers. Serena Blackwood, billionaire CEO, the sharpest mind in aerospace, was watching her empire crack in real time. A $200 million deal evaporating by the hour, reporters circling like vultures. And in the middle of her ultra-modern hangar, surrounded by genius after genius who had nothing, a man walked in carrying a dented toolbox and a dead man's notebook. He wasn't famous. He wasn't hired. He was just there to drop off a part. What happened next left an entire industry speechless. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We drop stories every week that you genuinely will not see coming. Hit like if this kind of story is your thing, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now buckle up. This one hits different. The call came on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Serena Blackwood had a theory about Tuesdays. Not a superstitious one, nothing like that. Just a pattern she'd noticed over 14 years of running a company that moved faster than most governments could regulate. Bad News had a preference for Tuesday mornings. Missed launches. Failed contracts. The Tuesday her father called to tell her he was proud of her, only to die of a heart attack that same afternoon before she could call him back. This Tuesday was no different. The jet won't start. Marcus Hale, her head of operations, said it the way a doctor says we found something, carefully, like the words themselves might do damage if released too fast. Serena was standing in her 43rd floor office in downtown Houston, halfway through a cup of coffee she hadn't tasted yet, looking out at a skyline that her company had partially built. She set the cup down. Run that by me again. The Blackwood Sovereign, the new one. It won't initialize. We ran full diagnostics, nothing flags. We brought in our entire maintenance crew last night. Nothing. Hardware failure? We don't know what it is. That's the problem. She was in the elevator before he finished the sentence. The Blackwood Sovereign wasn't just an aircraft. It was the physical proof of everything her company had spent 6 years promising the world. A next-generation private jet built with proprietary avionics architecture, a hybrid propulsion system that cut fuel consumption by 31%, and an interior that made first-class commercial travel look like a bus ride. It had taken 412 engineers, 3 continents worth of suppliers, and more money than most countries spent on education in a calendar year to produce a single working prototype. That prototype was now sitting on the tarmac of Blackwood's private hangar facility outside Houston, completely silent and refusing to explain itself. When Serena arrived, the scene was already chaotic in that quiet, expensive way that rich people's problems tended to be. No shouting, no visible panic, just a controlled frenzy of tablets and terminals and men and women in business casual who kept glancing at each other instead of talking. She walked straight past all of them to the jet itself. It was beautiful. She had to admit that even now, white fuselage with a thin gunmetal stripe running nose to tail, engines that looked like they'd been designed by someone who also sculpted. She'd flown in it exactly twice, both times for testing purposes. Both times it had performed without a single issue. "Show me the startup log," she said. A technician named Paula, 26 years old and clearly terrified of being associated with whatever this was, handed over a tablet. Serena read it again, looked up. "It's not rejecting the ignition sequence. It's not even reaching it." "Correct," Paula said. "It's terminating the initialization at step 4 of 14, every single time, without error, without explanation." "Without explanation," Serena repeated. "The diagnostic system flags nothing. From the aircraft's perspective, technically speaking, everything is fine." "Everything is fine," Serena said slowly, "and the plane won't start." "Yes." She handed the tablet back. "Get me Gould." Dr. Raymond Gould was considered by most of the aviation industry to be the closest thing to a living encyclopedia of avionics systems. He was 61, semi-retired, and had consulted on 3 generations of military aircraft before transitioning to private sector work. He arrived Wednesday morning, spent 4 hours with the jet, drank 6 cups of terrible hangar coffee, and left without a solution. "Replacement of the primary flight management computer," he recommended. "The unit may have experienced internal corruption during the software update last Friday." They replaced it. The jet still wouldn't start. A team from the aircraft's avionics manufacturer flew in Thursday. They replaced 2 additional control modules, ran a full system restore, and reinstalled every software package from scratch using factory backups. The jet still wouldn't start. By Friday, Serena had burned through $420,000 in components and labor. The Halverson Group, the international consortium whose $200 million contract depended on a live flight demonstration scheduled for Monday, was beginning to ask quiet questions that had loud implications. By Saturday, those questions became a formal notice of delay. By Sunday, the story leaked to the press. The headline that broke it was almost elegant in its brutality. Blackwood. Aerospace's new jet can't get off the ground. Literally. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by 47 financial outlets, 3 aviation journals, and 1 late-night comedy show that found the whole thing hilarious. Serena's personal phone rang continuously. Her board held an emergency call that lasted 3.5 hours and resolved nothing. Her stock dropped 4% in a single trading session, which translated to numbers she didn't want to look at directly. On Monday evening, after the Halverson Group formally requested a 60-day extension, which was corporate language for "we're deciding whether to walk away," Serena sat alone in her office and stared at the wall for 11 minutes. She timed it. It was the most unproductive 11 minutes of her adult life, and she hated every one of them. Then she opened her laptop and posted the offer. $3 million to anyone who can return the Blackwood Sovereign to operational status. Verified aviation professionals only. Contact operations@Blackwood Aerospace. Come. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she expected the offer to work, but because she genuinely couldn't think of what to do if it didn't. They came from everywhere. By Tuesday morning, her operations inbox had over 900 responses. By Tuesday afternoon, that number was over 2,000. Marcus and his team spent the next 16 hours filtering out the obvious frauds, the enthusiastic amateurs, and the 17 people who claimed to have psychic knowledge of aircraft systems. What remained was still a remarkable collection. Former NASA engineers, military avionics specialists, a woman who had spent 20 years maintaining stealth bomber systems for the Air Force and had flown in specifically from Nevada, a professor of computational aerospace systems from MIT, whose research had been cited by the FAA twice in the past decade. They came in waves, worked in shifts, and left with the same expression, frustrated, confused, and quietly shaken. None of them could identify the problem. The jet would initialize. It would run every pre-start check. It would move through 13 of the 14 steps in its startup sequence without a single anomaly. And then, at the critical moment when the system should have authorized engine start, it simply stopped, held, waited, and then quietly shut itself down like a person lying down to sleep. Not a crash, not an error, just a refusal, clean and total and completely without explanation. "It's like it's scared," one of the engineers said late one night, not really meaning for anyone to hear it. He was tired. He was probably venting. Nobody wrote it down. Owen Mercer almost didn't go at all. He'd seen the news story the same as everyone else. He had a Google alert set for Blackwood Aerospace because 3 of his regular clients operated Blackwood-adjacent systems, and he liked to stay ahead of manufacturer issues. When the offer appeared, his first reaction was to ignore it. His second reaction, which arrived about 4 hours later while he was eating reheated pasta at his kitchen table with his daughter Lily across from him, drawing something that looked like either a horse or a very ambitious dog, was to look it up again. "What are you looking at?" Lily asked without glancing up from her paper. "Work thing." "Is it interesting?" "Maybe." She looked up then. She had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of dark brown that caught light in a way that made it look like something was always slightly on fire behind them. "You're doing the forehead thing," she said. "What forehead thing?" "The wrinkle. Right here." She pointed to the center of her own forehead. "You do it when something's interesting, but you're pretending it's not." Owen looked back at his phone, then back at her. "Finish your pasta." "You're going to go, aren't you?" "I'm going to deliver a part. The Blackwood hangar is where I'm supposed to drop it off anyway. I just might stay a few extra minutes." Lily went back to her drawing. "Take Grandpa's notebook," she said. "You always think better when you have it." He didn't argue. He almost never argued with her when she said things like that. Not because she was always right, but because she was right often enough that it had become its own kind of fact. The hangar on Wednesday morning was organized chaos with a very expensive exterior. Owen arrived in his truck, a 2009 F-150 with a cracked side mirror and one door handle that required a specific lifting motion to open, and parked next to a rental sedan that still had the airport sticker on the window. He pulled his component delivery out of the back, signed in at the security desk, and walked through the main entrance with his toolbox in one hand and a small sealed crate in the other. The hangar was enormous. High ceilings, cold air, the particular smell of industrial cleaning solution, and jet fuel that Owen had grown up associating with his father's workplace. The Sovereign sat in the center under full lighting, surrounded by equipment carts, and at least 30 people who looked like they'd been there for days and were out of ideas. He found the receiving desk, completed the delivery paperwork, and was turning to leave when he heard it. Two technicians standing about 10 feet away, talking quietly over a tablet. Runs all the way through 13 steps, perfectly, and then it just stops. Like it's panicking. Like it's panicking. Owen stopped walking. He stood still for a moment, component crate still in his hands, looking at the floor. His father used to say something. A specific thing, repeated so many times over so many years that Owen had stopped really hearing it the way you stop hearing music that plays too often. But now, standing in a cold hangar with those two words rattling around in his head, it came back to him with a clarity that felt almost physical. When a system refuses to move forward, it's not broken. It's protecting itself. Your job is to figure out what it's afraid of, not to force it past the fear. Owen set the crate down on a nearby counter and opened his toolbox. Getting access to the aircraft was not straightforward. The first person he approached, a man in a company polo shirt who appeared to be coordinating the activity around the jet, looked at Owen's truck-worn jacket, his dented toolbox, and the notebook tucked under his arm, and said, "Deliveries are checked in at the front desk." "I already checked in," Owen said. "I want to look at the jet." "Are you on the approved specialist list?" "No." "Then I'm going to need you to—" "Who's in charge here?" The man in the polo shirt opened his mouth, closed it, and said, "Ms. Blackwood, but she's not taking—" "Can someone find her? Tell her there's a technician here who hasn't tried anything yet." That sentence went through 3 intermediaries in about 7 minutes, and when Serena Blackwood came around the far end of the aircraft and walked toward him, Owen noticed 2 things. She moved like someone who had not slept properly in days, and she was looking at him with the particular expression of a person who had run out of hope but was still going through the motions of searching for it. She looked at his jacket, his toolbox, the notebook. "Who sent you?" she said. "Nobody. I was making a delivery." A pause. "And you think you can fix this?" "I don't know yet. I'd like 5 minutes with the startup log. We have aerospace engineers who've been here for 4 days." "I know. I heard them describing it as panicking." He met her eyes. "That's not an engineering diagnosis. That's an observation, and I think it's the right one." Something shifted in her expression. Not hope exactly, more like the recognition that she had nothing left to lose by letting him try. "5 minutes," she said. "Don't touch anything without telling someone first." "Understood." She started to turn away, then stopped. "What's your name?" "Owen Mercer. I fix avionics systems. Mostly small craft, some commercial components. My father spent 30 years doing the same work." She nodded, like that meant something, or maybe like it meant nothing, and walked back toward the group of executives who were watching this exchange with open skepticism. Owen heard one of them say something quiet. He didn't catch the words. He caught the tone. He'd heard that tone his whole life. He opened the notebook and got to work. Owen didn't replace anything for the first 40 minutes. He didn't pull components. He didn't run new diagnostics or reinstall software. He sat at a terminal on the port side of the aircraft with his father's notebook open on the cart beside him, and he read the startup log, not skimmed it, read it, every line. Then he read it again backward, which was a technique his father had developed for exactly this kind of situation, reading a failure sequence in reverse to find where the system's logic had first started to fracture. Around him people watched, some with curiosity, some with barely concealed irritation. A senior engineer named Kowalski, who had flown in from Colorado and whose credentials occupied an entire page of his resume, stood with his arms crossed about 15 feet away and said nothing, but said it loudly. What Owen found was small, genuinely small. the kind of thing that was invisible to anyone looking for something large. 2 weeks before the malfunction began, the Sovereign had received a routine avionics software update. The update had been applied cleanly. No error messages, no flags, no anomalies. Both the aircraft's navigation system and its redundant backup navigation system had received the update. But the update had run on both systems simultaneously, and in the tiny gap between their completion timestamps, 4 milliseconds, not even the length of a human blink, the backup system had finalized first, which meant that for exactly 4 milliseconds after every update installation, the primary navigation system was technically running a marginally older timestamp than the backup. Under normal conditions, this would mean nothing, except that someone, a programmer, probably working alone at 2 in the morning with a deadline approaching, had written a safety protocol 3 years ago that checked for exactly this kind of discrepancy during initialization. Not because it was dangerous, but because during initial development, this kind of timestamp gap had once been associated with a corrupted install. So the protocol existed to catch it. The protocol hadn't been updated when the new navigation architecture was installed. It was still running its old logic. And when the jet initialized and ran its pre-start checks, the safety system saw the timestamp gap, couldn't verify which system's data was authoritative, and made the most cautious decision available to it. It stopped. It waited. It refused to proceed until it had certainty it couldn't achieve. The jet wasn't broken. The jet was doing exactly what it had been told to do. It just didn't know how to tell anyone that. Owen sat back in his chair and looked at the notebook. When a system refuses to move forward, it's not broken. It's protecting itself. He reached for his water bottle, which was empty. He'd finished it 90 minutes ago and hadn't noticed. "Mr. Mercer," Serena's voice came from behind him. He turned. She was standing with Marcus and 2 other executives, all of them reading the expression on his face. "You found something." "I think so," he said. "What is it?" He explained it. Carefully, without condescension, the way his father had always explained things, as if the other person were capable of understanding it, which most people were if you gave them the words in the right order. He showed them the timestamp gap in the log. He showed them the safety protocol and the original development record he'd found buried in the system documentation. He showed them how the logic chain ran from the discrepancy to the shutdown, step by step, clean and clear. By the time he finished, Serena had stopped looking at the log and started looking at him. "Nobody caught this," she said. "Not an accusation, a fact." "They were looking for something broken," Owen said. "There's nothing broken. That's why they couldn't find it." Kowalski spoke from his position 15 feet away. "If that's the problem, the fix is straightforward. Rebuild the timestamp reconciliation file and update the safety protocol parameters." "Yes," Owen said. "That's a 10-minute job." "About that." A silence settled over the hangar that was different from the silences that had come before it. "Do it," Serena said. "What?" Owen worked at the terminal for 9 minutes and 40 seconds. He rebuilt the corrupted initialization file, updated the safety protocol to recognize the current navigation architecture correctly, and reconciled the timestamp logic so both systems would finalize in the correct sequence. He made no other changes. He touched nothing else. When he was done, he stepped back from the terminal and found Serena standing behind him. "It should initialize now," he said. "Should?" "I'd bet on it," he said, "but I don't think I should be the one to run the startup. Ask your chief engineer to do it. These are your systems. Your team should be the ones to bring it back." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Then she turned and nodded to the chief engineer, a woman named Dr. Anita Rowe, who had been with Blackwood for 11 years. Dr. Rowe sat at the main terminal. The hangar went quiet in a way that Owen hadn't heard since walking in. Not the focused quiet of people working, but the held breath quiet of people waiting. The startup sequence began. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, 4, 5. One by one, the system indicators cycled through their checks, each one returning green, each green light pulling the oxygen a little tighter in the room. 6, 7, 8. Owen watched the screen. His hands, he noticed, were clasped in front of him in exactly the way his father used to stand when waiting on a repair result. He hadn't thought about that. It had just happened. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. The terminal paused. 1 second. 2. And then, on the screen, in clean white text against a dark background, engine start authorized. The engines came to life. Not dramatically. Not the way it happened in movies, with a roar that shook the walls and sent everyone stumbling backward. It was a rise, a build, a sound that started low and climbed steadily until it filled the hangar with the controlled, purposeful thunder of an aircraft that had decided it was ready. And then the room erupted. Not all at once. It started with Paula, the young technician who had handed Serena the tablet on day one, who made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Then Rose stood up from the terminal with both hands over her mouth. Then the rest of it came, clapping, shouting, people grabbing each other by the shoulders, the release of 6 days of pressure in 30 seconds of noise. Serena didn't move for a long moment. She stood with her hands at her sides and looked at the aircraft. Really looked at it, the way you look at something that almost broke you, trying to decide how you feel about it now that the crisis has passed. Then she turned and found Owen standing exactly where she'd left him. He wasn't celebrating. He was watching the engines run with an expression that was quiet and focused, like he was still listening for something, still checking. His toolbox was at his feet. The notebook was closed in his hand. "Mr. Mercer," she said. He looked at her. "You just saved my company." Owen was quiet for a moment. Not from modesty. He genuinely wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about a lighthouse puzzle sitting half-finished on the dining room table at home, and a promise he'd made before he left, and whether Lily had eaten a real dinner or just cereal again. "I'm glad it worked," he said. And then, because he was tired and hungry, and the hangar was getting loud in a way that made him want air, he picked up his toolbox, tucked the notebook back under his arm, and walked toward the exit. The parking lot outside the hangar was darker than Owen expected when he finally pushed through the side door. He'd lost track of time inside. That happened sometimes, when a problem pulled him deep enough that the rest of the world just sort of waited at the edge. His watch said 6:47 p.m. He'd been here since 9 in the morning. He sat in his truck for a minute before starting it, which was something he did after long jobs. Just sat. Let the quiet settle. The engines of the Sovereign were still audible through the hangar walls. A low, clean rumble that had a different quality to it now that Owen knew why it had been silent. It didn't sound triumphant. It just sounded like what it was. A machine doing the thing it was built to do. He pulled out his phone and called Lily. She picked up on the second ring. "Did you fix it?" "How do you know something needed fixing?" "Dad, it was on the news." He rubbed his face with his free hand. Of course it was on the news. "Yeah, it's running now." There was a pause, and then she said, in a tone that was somehow both 8 years old and 45, "I told you to take the notebook." "You did. Was it helpful?" "It was," he said, and something in his chest moved when he said it. Not painfully, just the way an old door moves when someone finally opens it after a long time. "I'll be home in 40 minutes. Don't eat just cereal." "I already ate cereal." "Lily." There was also a banana. He started the truck. "I'll bring food. Lock the door. Pitek." He brought home a paper bag from the taco place on Route 9 that Lily had declared the only acceptable dinner establishment in the greater Houston area, a designation she had maintained with impressive consistency for 2 years. She was still awake when he got back, sitting at the dining room table with the lighthouse puzzle spread out in front of her, the kind of practiced casual that meant she'd been watching for his headlights. They ate at the table without clearing the puzzle pieces, which was something Rachel used to say was bad table etiquette, and which Owen had quietly continued doing anyway, because Lily liked it, and because he couldn't think of a single good reason to stop. After dinner, Lily told him about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend Maya over the correct way to pronounce the word caramel, which had apparently escalated to a level requiring third-party mediation from their teacher. Owen listened, contributed opinions on the pronunciation debate, and did not think about the jet or the reward money or any of the rest of it until Lily was in bed and the house was quiet again. Then he sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open in front of him and thought about all of it. The call came at 7:14 the next morning, before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. He didn't recognize the number, but it had a Houston area code, and he answered it because some of his clients called from office lines. "Mr. Mercer." Serena Blackwood's voice was different on the phone than it had been in the hangar. Flatter, more controlled, stripped of the exhaustion she hadn't been able to fully hide in person. I hope I'm not calling too early. It's fine, Owen said. How'd you get my number? I have a good operations team. I'd like to meet with you today, if you're available. There's the matter of the reward. Owen looked at his coffee. I know. You left before we could discuss anything. I had to get home. A brief pause. You have a daughter. He hadn't mentioned Lily in the hangar, that he could remember. Then again, he'd signed in at the front desk, and she'd said she had a good operations team. I do, he said. Would 11 o'clock work for you? I can come to you if that's easier. I can come to you. He paused. Your office is in downtown? Yes, 22nd floor. Ask for Marcus at reception. He wrote down the address on the back of an envelope and arrived 15 minutes early, because he was always 15 minutes early. He sat in the lobby and watched a fish tank that took up most of one wall. Real fish, not decorative plastic ones, moving slowly through water that was exactly the shade of blue that didn't exist in nature, and thought about what he was going to say. He still wasn't sure when the elevator opened on the 22nd floor and a man in a good suit materialized in front of him. Mr. Mercer, I'm Marcus Hale. Ms. Blackwood is ready for you. The conference room overlooked the city on two sides, which was the kind of view that was designed to communicate a specific message about who held the power in any given conversation. Owen noticed it and decided not to be bothered by it. He sat down across from Serena, who was already there with 2 bottles of water on the table between them and nothing else. No legal team, no assistants, just her and the view. She looked better than she had yesterday. She'd slept. Not enough, probably, but some. The particular strain around her eyes had loosened, though it hadn't disappeared. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for the call. He uncapped the water. How's the jet? Running perfectly. We did a full systems check this morning. Every function nominal. She paused. Dr. Rowe wants to personally review the safety protocol architecture with our software team. She said you identified not just the bug, but a gap in our update validation process. The protocol was fine when it was written. The architecture changed and nobody updated the logic. It happens. In our company, it shouldn't. It happens everywhere, Owen said, not unkindly. That's not me defending it. It's just what's true. Serena looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her water bottle, didn't drink from it, set it back down. The reward is $3 million, Mr. Mercer. It'll be transferred to an account of your choosing by close of business tomorrow. My legal team just needs routing information. Owen nodded slowly. That's not an okay transfer it nod, Serena said. No. He turned the water bottle in his hands. I've been thinking about it. Since last night? Since last night and earlier, before I knew if the fix would even work. He set the bottle down. Can I ask you something first? Go ahead. The Halverson Group, are they still in? She was quiet for a beat. We've had preliminary conversations this morning. They're cautiously optimistic. The demonstration flight is being rescheduled. So the company is going to be okay. It's going to take time, she said carefully. The reputational damage doesn't disappear overnight. But, yes, we'll recover. Owen nodded again. This time, it was a different kind of nod. Then, I have something I'd like to propose instead of the transfer. Serena set her elbows on the table, not crossing her arms, elbows on the table, leaning forward slightly, the posture of someone who had decided to actually listen. Talk to me, she said. What? He talked for about 12 minutes without interruption, which was longer than he usually talked about anything except avionics systems. He told her about his father. Not the whole story, not the parts that still had rough edges, but enough. The small garage in Galveston where his father had spent 30 years repairing aircraft systems for a fraction of what he could have made at a major firm, because he believed that independent technical knowledge was the kind of thing that needed to exist outside of corporations. The apprentices he'd taken on over the years, young people who'd shown up with ability and no credentials, some of them barely 17, and whom his father had taught the same way he'd taught Owen, methodically, patiently, with the understanding that knowledge passed on was the only kind that compounded without shrinking. He told her about the notebook, not what was in it specifically, but what it represented. 30 years of practical problem-solving recorded in the margins, in shorthand, in diagrams that made perfect sense if you'd been the one thinking them through and required translation if you hadn't. His father had left it to him not as a legacy object, but as a working tool, and Owen had used it as exactly that ever since. And then he told her the idea. A training academy, not a scholarship fund. Those were fine. They existed. They helped in specific ways. He meant a full facility, practical-based, focused on avionics and aircraft systems, specifically recruiting from communities where the talent existed but the pathway didn't. Young people who'd grown up taking things apart in garages the way Owen had, who understood machines the way some people understood language, intuitively, from the inside, but who'd never had anyone show them that this ability was worth something, let alone teachable. Use the $3 million as seed funding. Get the thing built before it ran out and find a way to sustain it. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Serena was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read precisely. Not surprise exactly, more like the look of someone who had set out expecting one landscape and arrived at something different. "You're proposing to give up $3 million, she said. "I'm proposing to redirect it. To a program that doesn't exist yet." "Right. One that you would run." "I'd help build it. I'd be involved. I'm not a program director. I'm a technician. But I know what the curriculum needs to look like. And I know how to teach it because I was taught well." Serena leaned back in her chair. She turned slightly to look out at the city, not dismissively, more like a person who needed a wider field of vision to think in. Owen waited. He was comfortable waiting. "My board will want a business model," she said finally. "That's fair. A program like this, salaries, facility, equipment, insurance, outreach. $3 million doesn't cover the full build-out." "I know. That's why I'm asking you to invest it, not just spend it." He paused. "I can't make you do anything. If you want to write me a check, you can. I'll take it. I'll do something useful with it for Lily, and that'll be that." He turned his water bottle in his hands again. A habit, he noticed, that appeared when he was being direct about something. "But you built an aerospace company from 23 years old in an industry that told you to wait your turn. You didn't build it by making small bets." Serena looked back at him. "That was a deliberate thing to say," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile, not quite not. "Don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel like I'm being politely managed. Sorry." "How old is your daughter?" The shift in subject was abrupt enough that Owen blinked. 8. "What's her name?" "Lily." "What does she think about all this?" He thought about Lily at the table with the puzzle pieces, telling him to take the notebook, eating cereal and a banana, and acting like that was nutritionally adequate. "She told me to take the notebook," he said. "She was right. She usually is." Serena was quiet for a moment. "My father built his first business on borrowed money and 2 employees," she said. "Neither employee knew what they were doing when he hired them. He taught them. Both of them were with him for over 20 years. She paused. "He said the best investment he ever made wasn't in equipment or property or patents. It was in people who didn't know yet what they were capable of." Owen didn't say anything. It didn't seem like the moment for it. "I'd want full transparency," she said. "Quarterly reporting to my operations team. Independent auditing. A curriculum review board with real credentials." "Agreed. And I'd want to be involved in the selection criteria for the students. I have opinions about access and recruitment that go beyond what a standard program usually does." "That's actually helpful." She tilted her head slightly. "You're not going to argue with any of this. You're not saying anything I disagree with. Most people argue when they want something." "I'm not arguing because you're right," he said. "The program only works if it's accountable. I don't want to build something that runs well for 2 years and then falls apart because nobody was watching it closely." Serena studied him for a long moment. Long enough that Owen wondered if he'd miscalculated something. If there was a version of this conversation where the directness came across as something other than direct. Then she said, "I'm going to need a week to run the numbers with my team." "That's reasonable." "In the meantime, I'd like you to draft something, not a formal proposal. I have people who turn things into formal proposals. I want your version, what the program looks like, who it's for, how the teaching works. Write it the way you'd explain it to someone who doesn't know anything about avionics." Owen thought about his father's notebook, the way the entries mixed technical specifications with plain language notes in the margins, the way the handwriting changed slightly under pressure or when something had been hard won. "I can do that," he said. "Good." Serena stood, which in Owen's experience meant the meeting was ending. He stood too. I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. All right. Why not just take the money? You're raising a child alone. $3 million would change your life materially, immediately. Why give it away? Owen was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was attached to things he didn't usually hand to people he'd known for less than 24 hours. My father spent 30 years knowing things that would have been worth a lot more if he'd charged more for them, he said. He chose not to. For a long time, I thought that was about humility, or maybe stubbornness. But I don't think that's what it was. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He said the only knowledge that stays real is the kind that gets passed on. That if you keep it, it sits still. If you give it away, it moves. Serena didn't respond immediately. She was looking at him again with that unreadable expression. How long did it take you to find the problem in the jet? She asked. 40 minutes to find it, 9 minutes and 40 seconds to fix it. You timed the fix? I always time repairs. Helps me track what different kinds of problems actually cost. He put on his jacket. The finding is always the longest part. The fix is usually simple once you understand the problem. That's true of most things, Serena said. Yes, he agreed. It is. I was in the elevator on the way down when his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't have saved, but which he recognized from the morning's call. One more question. What did your father's notebook teach you yesterday, specifically? Owen looked at the message as the lobby floor appeared below the elevator glass. He typed back, that a system refusing to move isn't the same as a system that's broken. You have to find out what it's protecting itself from before you can help it move forward. He pocketed the phone. The lobby doors opened and the fish tank greeted him again, those slow, unhurried fish moving through impossible blue water. And he walked past it and out into the heat of a Houston morning. His phone buzzed again before he reached the truck. That's either very good avionics philosophy or very good life advice. He got in the truck, set the phone face down on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment the way he always did after something finished. The quiet settled. Outside, the city moved around him in all its ordinary motion. Delivery trucks, pedestrians with coffees, a woman pushing a stroller with the focused determination of someone on a schedule. He thought about what he'd said in that conference room. He thought about whether it had landed the way he meant it to, and whether it mattered if it hadn't, and whether the whole idea was something that could actually survive contact with lawyers and boards and quarterly reports. He thought about Lily's face when he told her the fix had worked, and the lighthouse puzzle on the table, and the particular way she said, I told you to take the notebook. Not triumphant, just certain, the way children are certain about things they haven't learned yet to doubt. He picked up his phone and typed one last message back. Both, I think. Then he started the truck and drove home, because he had 3 other clients waiting on repairs, and a puzzle that still wasn't finished, and none of the rest of it was going to resolve itself before Thursday. It was Marcus who called him on Friday to say that Serena had brought the proposal to a preliminary review with 2 senior board members, not the full board, just 2 people she trusted, and that the response had been, in Marcus's careful phrasing, more positive than anticipated. What does that mean in real numbers? Owen asked. He was in his workshop behind the house, soldering a sensor array for a Cessna owner in Katy, whose aircraft had been throwing intermittent altitude warnings. It means she wants to meet again Monday morning, Marcus said. She'd like you to bring the draft she asked for. I've got something. It's not polished. She said specifically not polished. Owen set down the soldering iron. Tell her Monday works, Set. He spent the weekend finishing the puzzle with Lily. The lighthouse turned out to be harder than it looked, as lighthouses often were, with more individual pieces per square inch than anything else in the image. And at the kitchen table on Saturday night, after Lily went to bed, he opened his laptop and wrote 8 pages about what the academy needed to be. Not a proposal, not a presentation, just the thing itself, described in plain language. Who it was for, how the teaching would work, what a student needed to know when they left, and why a piece of paper at the end mattered less than what was inside the person carrying it. He read it back twice. It didn't sound like a business document. It sounded like something his father would have said, which was either its greatest problem or its greatest strength, and he genuinely wasn't sure which. He saved it, closed the laptop, and went to bed. Monday morning, he drove back downtown with the document on a USB drive and his father's notebook on the seat beside him, and he thought about all the young people out there right now. 17, 18, 20, sitting in garages they'd never been told were classrooms, taking apart machines they'd never been told were futures, waiting for someone to show up and say that thing you already know how to do. It's worth something. Let me show you how far it goes. He was 15 minutes early. He always was. Marcus met him in the lobby again. Same good suit, same professional neutrality. Though this time Owen noticed something slightly different in the man's manner. Less cautious. Like a door that had been cracked open the first time was now a few inches wider. She's already in the conference room, Marcus said. She's been here since 6. Owen checked his watch. It was 10:47. That's early. It's early for most people, Marcus said, which wasn't really an answer. The conference room looked different this time, or maybe it was the same and Owen was just seeing it differently. The same two-sided view of Houston, the same table, but now there were papers spread across it. Not scattered, not chaotic, but working spread. The way a surface looks when someone has actually been doing something instead of preparing to look like they've been doing something. Serena was standing at the far end with a coffee mug in one hand and her phone in the other, reading something on the screen. She looked up when Owen came in. "You're early," she said. "I'm always early." "I know, Marcus mentioned it." She set the phone down. "Coffee?" "Please." She poured from a carafe on the credenza without asking how he took it, which meant she either assumed black or she'd had someone find out. It arrived in front of him black, which was correct. He put the USB drive on the table. She looked at it, but didn't pick it up yet. "I read the notes you sent over the weekend," she said. She'd asked him Friday afternoon to email any preliminary thoughts, and he'd sent 3 paragraphs that were really just the skeleton of what was on the drive. The part about credentials versus competency. What about it? "You wrote that the program's exit benchmark shouldn't be a certificate. It should be a documented repair. A real problem, solved, with a written explanation of the diagnostic process." She sat down across from him. "You want the students to produce something like your father's notebook." Owen hadn't thought of it in exactly those terms, but when she said it, it landed correctly. "Not the same notebook," he said. "Their own version. Something that shows they can find a problem and explain why the fix works, not just that they followed a procedure." "That's harder to quantify." "Yes." "Harder to market to employers." "Also yes. But the employers who understand what it means will fight to hire those students. And the ones who don't understand what it means aren't the right employers for these kids anyway." Serena turned her coffee mug in her hands. The same water bottle habit he'd noticed himself doing, he realized. People did that. Held things when they were working through something. "My legal team spent Friday reviewing the liability structure of a private training foundation," she said. "The operational framework is more complex than a direct donation would be." "More complex isn't the same as impossible." "No, but it means the timeline is longer than a week," she paused. "I want to be clear about something, Owen." It was the first time she'd used his first name, and she did it without making it a moment. Just shifted to it the way you shift into a gear. "This isn't me slow-walking a decision. I've already made the decision. The legal complexity is real, and working through it correctly is what protects the program long-term. If we rush the structure, we build something fragile." He understood that. He'd seen what happened to fragile things. They worked fine right up until the exact wrong moment. What's the realistic timeline? 8 to 12 weeks to establish the foundation correctly. In the meantime, she picked up one of the papers from the spread in front of her. "I'd like to propose a letter of intent. Formal commitment from Blackwood Aerospace to fund the Mercer Aviation Training Initiative at $3 million initial capitalization, with a 5-year operational support agreement to be negotiated separately." Owen looked at the paper. "You already drafted it." "I drafted it Saturday night." He looked up. "You said you needed a week." "I said I needed a week to run the numbers. I ran them Saturday." She set the paper down. "The numbers work. The concept works. The thing I needed the week to figure out was whether you were someone I could build something with, and I'd already figured that out before you left the building Thursday." Owen sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, Houston went about its business. An ordinary Monday morning in the life of a city that never particularly paused to acknowledge what was happening in any given conference room on any given floor. "There's something I should tell you," he said. "All right. I've never run a program before. I've run a one-man repair business for 9 years. I've taught maybe a dozen people informally, 3 of them seriously. I'm good at the technical side. The administrative side, he stopped. I'll learn it, but I'm going to need people around me who already know it, and I'll need time to get up to speed on things I currently know nothing about. Serena nodded. I know. You know. I know you've never run a program. I know you're a one-man operation who drives a truck with a cracked mirror and charges below-market rates for work that most certified shops charge triple for. She picked up her coffee. I didn't choose you for your administrative experience. Then why? She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, considering. Because you walked into my hangar carrying a dead man's notebook and a dented toolbox, she said, and you found in 40 minutes what 4 days of expensive expertise couldn't find. And then instead of celebrating, you were thinking about getting home to your daughter. She paused. The people who build things that last are usually people who are thinking about something more important than the thing itself. Owen didn't have an immediate response to that, which didn't happen often. Also, she added, you called the safety protocol fix a 10-minute job when Kowalski said it, and it was 9 minutes and 40 seconds, so you were essentially right. I timed things. I know, it's useful. She slid the letter of intent across the table. Read it. Take it home if you want. Don't let me rush you. He read it there, which took 6 minutes. It was written cleanly, without the kind of legal ornamentation that existed purely to justify billing hours, and it said exactly what she'd described. Commitment to $3 million in initial capitalization, intent to negotiate 5-year support, program named the Mercer Aviation Training Initiative, with Owen Mercer listed as founding director and technical lead. Founding director. He'd never had a title before. He wasn't sure how he felt about it. The name, he said. What about it? I'd rather it not be named after me. Serena raised an eyebrow. It's customary when... I know it's customary. I'd rather it be named after the work, or after the students. He set the paper down. Something that tells a 17-year-old from a neighborhood that doesn't send people to aerospace companies what the program is for, not whose name is on the door. Serena studied him. What would you call it? He thought for a moment. Outside, a plane crossed the visible sky above the Houston skyline. Commercial, passenger, ordinary miracle of the kind that most people forgot to notice. The Open Skies Initiative, he said, or something close to that. Serena picked up a pen and wrote something in the margin of the letter. We'll finalize the name during the foundation setup, but noted. She set the pen down. Now, I need you to meet someone. The someone was Dr. Anita Rowe, who Owen knew from the hangar but hadn't spoken with directly until Serena brought her into the conference room 20 minutes later. Rowe was Blackwood's chief engineer, 11 years with the company, MIT doctorate, sharp, in the way that people who'd had to be sharper than everyone around them for their entire careers tended to be. She shook Owen's hand with the grip of a person who had decided long ago that her handshake was going to be unremarkable so that her competence could do the actual work. I owe you an apology, Rowe said, sitting down. Owen blinked. For what? I was one of the people who thought you were wasting everyone's time. She said it without embarrassment, which he respected. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought it loudly enough that you might have felt it. I felt it from about 4 different directions, Owen said. It didn't bother me. It should have. People make assessments based on available information. My information wasn't impressive. Rowe looked at him steadily. Your information was a dented toolbox and an old notebook. Exactly. And you were right anyway. Partially lucky. You weren't, Rowe said flatly. I read your diagnostic walkthrough. Marcus had you write it up for the operational record, and I read every line. What you did wasn't luck. It was methodology. A different methodology than what the rest of us were using, but a rigorous one. She paused. I want to be part of the curriculum designed for the academy. If you'll have me. Owen looked at Serena, who was watching this with the expression of someone who'd anticipated it, then back at Rowe. What would you bring? He asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking, the way his father had always asked. What do you know that I don't? Tell me exactly. Current systems knowledge, Rowe said. I know what's actually in use in modern aircraft, what skills the industry is going to need in 5 years, what the certification pathways look like, and where they're genuinely useful versus where they're gatekeeping for its own sake. She folded her hands on the table. You know how to teach someone to think. I know what they need to be thinking about. That's a different kind of knowledge, and the program needs both. Owen looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. All right. Roe nodded once, the way a person nods when the answer was the one they expected, but they're not going to make it a bigger moment than it needs to be. The next 6 weeks were harder than Owen had expected, though he hadn't expected them to be easy. He continued running his repair business because the work didn't stop because his life was changing, and because 4 clients had jobs pending that he'd committed to, and because the steady income from the business meant he wasn't financially dependent on the Academy timeline, which mattered because the Academy timeline slipped 3 times for reasons that had nothing to do with anyone's intentions. Lawyers needed things. Filings required responses. A nonprofit designation process involved forms that seemed to be designed by people who wanted to make sure you really meant it before they let you proceed. He drove Lily to school every morning at 7:40 and picked her up at 3:15, or arranged for Maya's mother to do pickup when a job ran late, which happened twice a week on average. He made dinner 4 nights out of 7. The other 3 nights were takeout, which Lily did not object to as long as it wasn't the sandwich place on Clement Street, which had once given her a sandwich that tasted like disappointment. Her exact description, delivered with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what disappointment tasted like. He met with Serena's team every Thursday morning downtown. He wrote curriculum outlines at night after Lily went to bed, at the kitchen table, with the notebook open beside his laptop, even when he wasn't referencing it directly. Something about having it nearby helped him think. He'd never told anyone that except Lily, and she'd accepted it the way she accepted most of his particular habits, as factual conditions of the world rather than things requiring explanation. On a Thursday in the 4th week, he walked into the conference room to find 3 people he didn't recognize sitting alongside Marcus and Roe. A woman who turned out to be Blackwood's director of community relations, a man from a Houston nonprofit that specialized in workforce development, and a young woman named Deja, whose last name Owen didn't catch initially, and who was introduced as a consultant on educational access programs. He shook hands with all of them and sat down, and the meeting lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. And by the end of it, the curriculum had been revised twice, and the recruitment strategy had been built from scratch, and Owen had a headache that lived specifically behind his left eye. In the parking garage afterward, Roe fell into step beside him. "You look like you're reconsidering everything," she said. "I'm reconsidering the meeting structure," he said, "not the program. The meetings get more manageable." "When?" She thought about it. "Maybe 6 months in." "That's not reassuring." "I know, but the meetings are what build the thing, and you can't build the thing without them, so—" Owen unlocked his truck. The cracked mirror caught his reflection at an angle. He looked tired, which was accurate, and older than he felt, which probably was too. "My father used to say that the hardest part of any repair wasn't identifying the problem or fixing it. It was keeping the customer calm while you worked." Roe leaned against the adjacent car. "And all these meetings are the keeping calm part." "Something like that." "Then what's the actual repair?" He got into the truck. "The students," he said. "The repair's the students. The meetings are just the part we have to get through to reach them." She nodded. I thought he saw something shift in her expression. Not sentiment exactly, more like the recognition of a framing that fit accurately. "Same time Thursday," she said, and walked back toward the elevator. "Awesome." The letter came on a Tuesday. Of course it did. In the 5th week. A formal notice from a Houston area technical college that had caught wind of the initiative through Blackwood's public communications and wanted to discuss a potential conflict of interest, given that their own aviation maintenance program served some of the same population. Owen read the letter at his workshop bench between a GPS calibration job and a radio replacement, and then he read it again. Then he called Serena. "I saw it," she said. "My legal team is preparing a response." "Before they do, can we talk about the substance of it, not the legal piece?" A pause. "Go ahead." "They're not wrong that we're serving overlapping populations. And their program, I looked it up this morning. It's not bad. It's credential-heavy and light on the kind of problem-solving teaching I care about, but the instructors have real experience and the placement rates are decent." He picked up a screwdriver and put it down. "I don't want to compete with them. I want to figure out if there's a way to exist alongside them." That's a more complicated conversation than a legal response. Yes. Can you get me a meeting with their program director? Another pause, longer this time. Owen, you understand that adding partners means adding complexity, and we're already. I know, but if we build something that steps on a program that's already helping people, we spend the next 5 years defending ourselves instead of teaching. And if we build something that works with them, we reach more people than either program does alone. He could hear her thinking. He'd learned to distinguish Serena's silences over the past weeks. The one that meant she was skeptical, the one that meant she was calculating, and the one that meant she already agreed but was running through the implications. This was the third one. I'll get you the meeting, she said. Thank you. For the record, she said, my legal team is going to be annoyed. I'll apologize to them specifically. They won't care, but it's nice you offered. She paused. How's Lily? It was the second time she'd asked, unprompted. The first had been in the third week, at the end of a Thursday meeting, when everyone else had filtered out and she'd stayed an extra minute with her coffee. He hadn't been sure then whether it was genuine or polite. He was beginning to think it was genuine. She's good, he said. She's been teaching her friend Maya how to solve jigsaw puzzles efficiently. Is there an efficient way to solve jigsaw puzzles? According to Lily, you sort by edge pieces first, then by color field, then by internal pattern density. She developed the system herself over about 6 months of iteration. Serena was quiet for a beat. She sounds like her father. She's sharper, Owen said, by a significant margin. The meeting with the technical college went better than expected, which in Owen's experience meant it went poorly in all the predictable ways and well in the ways that actually mattered. The program director was a man named Frank Castellano, 63 years old, a former Air Force mechanic who had built the aviation maintenance program from nothing 20 years ago and was visibly protective of it in the way people are protective of things they'd given years to. He came into the room with the body language of someone expecting to be told that his program was being replaced, and Owen spent the first 20 minutes just listening to him talk about what the program had actually done. The students it had put into careers, the partnerships with regional carriers, the equipment donations it had fought for and obtained through a combination of persistence and creative grant writing. Owen let him finish. Then he said, I don't want to replace any of that. I want to build something that does a different thing. Frank looked at him with the skepticism of a man who'd heard similar sentences before. Which is what, exactly? Your program takes students who are ready for structured training and puts them through a proven pathway to certification. You do that well. Owen leaned forward. I want to reach the students before they're ready, the ones who have the ability but haven't been told it's usable yet, the ones falling through the cracks between raw talent and your front door. Frank was quiet for a moment. Feeder pipeline, he said. Something like that. Your program is the structure. I want to build the on-ramp. Frank looked at Serena, who was sitting to Owen's left and who had, in a discipline Owen had come to admire, said almost nothing during the meeting. This was your idea? Frank asked her. The funding was my idea, she said. The concept was his. Frank looked back at Owen. You're proposing a formal partnership. I'm proposing that we figure out what one would look like. If it makes sense, we build it. If it doesn't, we stay out of each other's way and both do good work. Frank thought about that. He had the manner of a man who'd been in too many meetings that promised collaboration and delivered competition, and Owen didn't blame him for it. He waited. Let me show you the shop, Frank said finally, standing up. If you haven't seen it. Owen hadn't. He followed Frank down a hallway and through a set of doors into a training facility that was small, slightly underfunded in its equipment, and completely alive. 6 students at workbenches, 2 instructors circulating, the specific smell of machine oil and young concentration that Owen associated with his father's garage on a Saturday morning. He stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. One of the students, a young woman, maybe 19, with safety glasses pushed up on her forehead, was troubleshooting something on a partially disassembled control unit, frowning at it with the particular focus of someone who was close to an answer and knew it. She didn't look up when the door opened. She was somewhere else entirely, inside the problem. Owen watched her for 10 seconds, 15. She's good, he said quietly. Best student I've had in 4 years, Frank said, also quietly. Scholarship kid from the east side, Came in here knowing how to take apart a car engine with a YouTube tutorial and a socket set. Zero formal background. What's her name? Camille Reyes. As if she heard it, though she probably heard it because someone had said it, not through any other mechanism. Camille looked up, saw two people she didn't recognize standing in the doorway with her program director, made a swift, unconscious assessment in the way young people did when they weren't sure if the people looking at them were important. Then looked back at the control unit. Owen turned to Frank. How many Camille Reyes are out there who never made it to your front door? Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, more than I want to think about. That's what the program is for, Owen said. That's the whole reason. They went back to the conference room and talked for another hour and a half. And by the end of it, they had the rough shape of something that might work. Not a formal agreement, not yet, but a shared understanding of what each program was for and how the two things could pull in the same direction instead of against each other. On the way out to the parking lot, Frank stopped Owen at the door. Who taught you? Frank asked. My father. In a shop? In a garage, back of our house in Galveston. He started teaching me when I was 7. Owen shifted his keys in his hand. He had a notebook. 30 years of repairs written down. I used it last week to fix a $64,000 avionics unit on a Piper that a certified shop had misdiagnosed twice. Frank studied him. The notebook is the curriculum. The notebook is the philosophy, Owen said. The curriculum is built around the philosophy. Frank nodded once, slowly. I'd like to see that notebook sometime, he said. If you'd be willing. Owen thought about the way Lily talked about it. Take the notebook. You always think better when you have it. Thought about his father's handwriting in the margins. Hurried in some places, careful in others, occasionally just a word or two that meant something only to the person who'd written them, and to the one who'd spent a lifetime learning to read them. Come to the facility when we open, Owen said. I'll have it there. He drove home with the windows down because the evening air had finally, after weeks of summer that had felt almost aggressive in its heat, found a temperature that felt like relief. On the radio, a song he didn't know. On the seat beside him, the notebook and his phone, and the remains of a cup of gas station coffee he'd bought 3 hours ago and forgotten about. He pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment. The lights were on inside. Through the front window, he could see the glow of the television and the smaller, closer shape of a lamp at the dining room table. Lily, still up past her bedtime, almost certainly still working on something. Homework or a drawing or a new iteration of the puzzle-solving system. He got out of the truck and stood in the driveway for a moment, under a sky that had gone from orange to deep blue in the time it took to drive home, the stars just beginning to show at the edges where the city light thinned out. Somewhere across town, in a hangar he'd walked out of 3 weeks ago, the Sovereign was parked and ready. The program was being built by people who were good at building programs. Camille Reyes was troubleshooting a control unit with focused precision and no idea yet what kind of career was possible for someone with her hands and her mind. And inside the house, the lamp was on, and Lily was awake, and none of this was finished yet. Owen picked up his coffee, found it cold, and drank it anyway. Then he went inside. The foundation paperwork cleared on a Wednesday, which Owen noted with some private satisfaction given his long-standing theory about Tuesdays. Marcus called at 9:23 in the morning while Owen was under the instrument panel of a Beechcraft Baron whose owner had been patient about the timeline in the way that only people with other aircraft to fly could afford to be patient. It's official, Marcus said. The Open Skies Initiative is a registered nonprofit entity in the state of Texas. Blackwood Aerospace has completed the initial capital transfer. You're legally real now. Owen stayed where he was for a moment, looking up at a tangle of wiring that he'd been sorting through for the better part of an hour. Okay, he said. That's your response? Okay. What would you prefer? Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh. Serena said you'd say something like that. She also said to tell you that the board presentation is Thursday at 2 and attendance is not optional. I'll be there. She said to tell you that too. Owen went back to the wiring. The Baron's owner, a man named Gerald who flew to his lake house in Arkansas every other weekend from April to October, had reported intermittent compass deviations that 2 other shops had attributed to magnetic interference from aftermarket speakers someone had installed badly in 2019. Owen had pulled the speakers, confirmed the interference theory was partially correct, and then found a second problem underneath it, a grounding issue in the navigation bus that had been contributing its own quiet chaos to the compass readings all along. Two problems dressed as one. His father had a name for that, a masking failure. The obvious problem hiding the real one. He thought about that as he finished the repair. The wiring sorted itself into order under his hands, each connection going where it belonged, the logic of the system reasserting itself as the interference was removed. There was something satisfying about it that he'd never found a better word for than right, the particular satisfaction of a thing returning to what it was supposed to be. He billed Gerald for 3 hours of labor, which was 2 hours less than the job had actually taken, because the extra time had been spent confirming the speaker theory before finding the grounding issue, and charging someone fully for the time you spent eliminating your own wrong hypotheses had always seemed to Owen like a form of dishonesty. His father had operated the same way. It was one of the reasons neither of them had ever gotten particularly rich doing this work. He washed his hands, locked the workshop, and went inside to tell Lily that Thursday afternoon she'd be going home with Maya after school. The Blackwood Aerospace boardroom was on the 43rd floor, which Owen had not been to before. The conference room on 22 had become familiar over the past weeks. Its specific quality of light, the fish tank in the lobby below it, the particular elevator that opened 2 feet to the left of where you'd expect. The 43rd floor was different, quieter, the kind of quiet that costs money to maintain. There were 12 people around the table when Owen walked in, which was 11 more than he was comfortable presenting to, though he didn't let that show in anything except a slight deliberate slowness in the way he set his folder down and pulled out his chair. Serena was at the head of the table. Roe was to her left. Marcus was by the door with a tablet. The remaining 9 were board members and senior executives whose names Owen had been given in a briefing document that Marcus had sent over Wednesday night, and which he had read twice and retained imperfectly. "Thank you all for being here," Serena said, which was the kind of sentence that technically meant nothing because everyone in the room was required to be there, but which set a tone. "You've all received this foundation documents and the program proposal. Today, Owen Mercer is going to walk us through the initiative in his own words, and then we'll open for questions." Owen stood. He'd decided against slides after spending an hour building them and concluding that they made the thing feel smaller than it was. He had his 8-page document and the notebook, and he put the notebook on the table in front of him the way other people put their credentials on the table, and he talked. He told them about the gap, not the funding gap, which everyone in a boardroom understood, but the recognition gap. The one that existed between a 17-year-old in a neighborhood without aerospace industry connections who could intuitively diagnose a mechanical problem, and the moment when that ability became a career. He told them about his father's garage and what had been built inside it, not as sentiment but as proof of concept. Look at what practical teaching had produced. Look at what it had just accomplished in an $80 million aircraft that 4 days of credentialed expertise couldn't fix. He told them about Camille Reyes and the way she'd looked at that control unit with her safety glasses pushed up, entirely somewhere else, entirely inside the problem. He talked for 18 minutes. One of the board members, a man named Patterson, who had the specific energy of someone who had survived 30 years of corporate politics by asking the question nobody else wanted to ask, interrupted once. "Mr. Mercer, what's your personal compensation arrangement with the foundation?" Owen had expected this question. "I receive a part-time instructor salary equivalent to local adjunct teaching rates, approximately $22,000 a year." Patterson looked at Serena. "The man who saved the sovereign is taking $22,000. "The man who saved the sovereign is also running a repair business," Owen said, "and doesn't want the foundation's money spent on him when it can be spent on students." "That's admirable," Patterson said, in the tone of someone who found admirable things slightly suspicious. "It's practical," Owen said. "The program only earns credibility if the money visibly goes to the students. If my salary is line 1 of the budget, the story becomes about me. I'd rather the story be about what the students build." Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then he wrote something down, which in Owen's experience was what people did when an answer had landed correctly, and they didn't want to show it. The questions ran for 40 minutes. Owen answered all of them, acknowledged the 2 or 3 he didn't have complete answers to, and said, "I don't know yet, but here's how we'll find out 3 specific times. which was a sentence his father had used regularly and which Owen had come to believe was more credible than a confident answer to something genuinely uncertain. Serena called for a vote at the end. It was 11-1 in favor. Patterson was not the one dissent. The dissent came from a board member named Christine Aldridge, who had concerns about reputational exposure if the program underperformed, and who stated those concerns clearly and without malice, which Owen found he respected even while disagreeing with the conclusion. After the room cleared, Serena stayed behind with Owen and Roe. 11-1, Roe said. She sounded like she'd expected 12-0 but wasn't displeased. Aldridge isn't wrong, Owen said. The reputational risk is real if we underperform. Then we don't underperform, Serena said. It's not that simple. I know it's not that simple, but it's what we're working toward. She closed her portfolio. The facility lease is signed. We have the warehouse space on the east side, 12,000 square feet, which Roe tells me is sufficient for the initial equipment installation. Owen had seen the space once, briefly, on a walkthrough 3 weeks prior. A former machine shop, high ceilings, concrete floors, natural light from clerestory windows that had been added sometime in the building's second life. It had smelled like the ghost of industrial work, and something else underneath that, something older. He'd liked it immediately. When does equipment installation start? He asked. 2 weeks, Roe said. I've already spoken to 3 of our vendor partners about donated training equipment. 2 have committed. The 3rd is still deciding. What do they need to decide? Whether the tax benefit outweighs the liability of having equipment in an unproven program, Roe said it matter-of-factly. I'm working on it. Let me talk to them, Owen said. Roe looked at him. You want to handle the vendor negotiation? I want to have one conversation with whoever's deciding. Not a formal meeting, just a conversation. Serena and Roe exchanged a look that Owen caught but didn't comment on. I'll set it up, Roe said. What? The vendor was a regional avionics equipment supplier named Daltech, and the person deciding was their VP of Business Development, a woman named Sandra Cho, who had agreed to 15 minutes over the phone and who had the efficient, slightly guarded manner of someone who spent most of her day managing requests from people who wanted things from her company. Owen called from his workshop, which was where he thought best, sitting at his bench with the soldering station off and the notebook open to a blank page he'd been making notes on. I appreciate the time, he said. I'll be quick. Tell me what concerns you about the program. Sandra paused, apparently not expecting the conversation to open that way. The liability structure is still being reviewed by our legal. What's your specific concern? Not legal's concern, yours. Another pause. Our equipment is calibrated to professional standards. If it's used for student training without adequate supervision, we expose ourselves to, what do your current professional customers use your equipment for? Aircraft maintenance and repair. Right, which involves students? He kept his voice even, not challenging, curious. Entry-level technicians learning on real systems? Well, yes. So the question isn't whether your equipment gets used by people who are still learning, it's whether the supervision and curriculum are adequate to prevent misuse. He picked up the pencil and wrote something on the blank page, mostly a habit, not retention. I can send you the curriculum framework and the supervision protocols. I can also give you Frank Castellano's number. He runs the aviation maintenance program at Houston Technical. He's been doing this for 20 years, and he's partnering with us on student intake. If you have liability concerns, his record is the best answer to them. Sandra was quiet for a moment. You're not what I expected from this call, she said. What did you expect? A pitch. I'm not pitching. I'm trying to figure out if the concerns are real problems or just uncertainty about something new. Real problems we can solve together. Uncertainty goes away when you have more information. She made a small sound. Not agreement exactly, more like recalibration. Send me the curriculum documents and Castellano's contact. I'll have another conversation with our team. Daltech committed the following week. Full equipment package for 12 student workstations. Roe called Owen when she got the confirmation email. What did you say to her? I asked what she was actually worried about. That's it? And I didn't try to talk her out of the worry. I tried to answer it. Roe was quiet for a beat. You should teach a class in this, separate from the avionics. One thing at a time, Owen said. The first cohort application period opened on a Monday in October, 6 weeks after the board approval, with a simple online form and a deliberate absence of the kind of requirements that functioned as filters for people who'd never been told that places like this were for them. No minimum GPA, no prior coursework. A short written response, not an essay, a response, to a single question. Describe something you took apart and what you learned from doing it. Owen had written the question himself, at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning while Lily ate breakfast across from him and told him about a documentary she'd watched about deep-sea creatures that had, in her assessment, significantly undersold the weirdness of anglerfish. Does it have to be mechanical? Lily asked, reading the question upside down from across the table. What do you mean? Taking something apart. Does it have to be a machine? Owen looked at the question. No, he said. Then you should say that. Because some people might have taken apart a problem, or a situation, or a song to learn how it worked. And if they think you only mean machines, they won't apply. He added a line. This doesn't have to be a machine. It can be any system, physical, digital, social, that you examined by understanding its pieces. Lily went back to her cereal. Owen looked at the edition, decided it was better, and sent the revised version to Ro. Ro replied in 4 minutes. Who helped you with this? He typed back, my daughter. Ro's response was a single period, which he had learned over the past weeks was her version of a nod. Applications came in faster than anyone had modeled. By the end of the first week, they had 217. By the end of the second week, 408. They came from high school seniors and 23-year-olds who'd spent time in jobs that had nothing to do with aviation and everything to do with fixing things. Car mechanics, HVAC technicians, one young man who'd spent 3 years repairing refrigeration units for a restaurant supplier, and who wrote in his response that he'd taken apart his school's broken water fountain in 7th grade because it bothered him that it just sat there not doing what it was supposed to do, and that he'd fixed it, and that nobody had ever explained to him that this impulse was unusual. Owen read every application himself. He'd told Ro and the curriculum team to build a scoring rubric, which they had, but he read every one before the rubric got applied because he'd learned from his father that the thing you were actually looking for didn't always show up in the scored categories. His father used to say that the best technicians weren't the ones who knew the most. They were the ones who were most bothered by not understanding something. Curiosity with teeth. You couldn't teach that from scratch, but you could find it if you knew how to read for it. He was on the third evening of reading applications when Lily came into the kitchen at 9:15 in her pajamas and stood next to his chair, looking at his laptop screen. Are those the people who want to come to your school? She asked. Program, he said, not school. What's the difference? He thought about it. A school tells you what to know. A program shows you how to find out. She considered this with the focused expression she used when an idea was being assessed for accuracy. That's good, she decided, and went to get a glass of water. You should be asleep, he said. I know. She stood at the sink, looking out the dark window at the backyard. Dad? Yeah. Did Mom know about this? What you're building? The question landed quietly. Owen set his hands flat on the table, not moving for a moment. Rachel had been gone for 4 years, which was long enough that the grief had changed shape, less like something that hit him and more like something that lived in the house alongside everything else, familiar and present, and occasionally catching him off guard in exactly this way. She didn't know about this specifically, he said, but she knew what I thought about the work. She always said I should be teaching. He paused. She used to say your grandfather was the best teacher she'd ever met, and that I'd gotten his ability for it and was wasting it on engines that couldn't appreciate it. Lily turned around from the window. Her expression was the one Owen had no name for, the one that was too old for her face and too young for what it carried. She would have liked this, Lily said. Yeah, Owen said. She would have. Lily went back to bed without saying anything else, which was the right thing to do, and Owen sat at the table for another 10 minutes before he could read again. The first cohort was selected in November. 22 students, ages ranging from 17 to 27. 14 from Houston proper, 4 from surrounding counties, 3 from the Dallas area who were willing to relocate for the 8-month program, and 1 from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who had driven to Houston for the in-person component of the interview process in a car with a check engine light that had been on for 6 months, which Owen had noted and which had made him feel something he didn't have a word for that was adjacent to certainty. The orientation was scheduled for January. The facility was ready. The equipment installation had finished on time, which Roe had said she was only 60% confident would happen, and which had happened through a combination of her organizational precision and what Owen privately thought of as the particular energy that attaches itself to things that are genuinely meant to exist. But November brought something Owen hadn't anticipated. The story broke on a Tuesday, because of course it did. A Houston business journal ran a piece about the initiative, one of those profile articles that was ostensibly celebratory, but whose interest, Owen recognized quickly, was really in the angle of a billionaire CEO redirecting a $3 million reward to a nonprofit rather than paying the man who'd earned it. The piece was written competently and reported accurately, but it framed the whole thing in a way that made Owen uncomfortable, as Serena's philanthropic gesture, with Owen as a kind of inspiring prop in her narrative. His name was in the headline, but his voice was mostly absent from the text. He read it twice and thought about calling someone. He wasn't sure who. He called Serena instead. "I saw it," she said, before he could speak. The framing, "I know. I've already spoken to the journalist. She's open to a follow-up." Serena paused. "I should have made sure your voice was centered in the original piece. That's on me." "It's not about my voice," Owen said, which was partially true. "It's about what the students see when they look up the program. If the first story that comes up makes this look like a rich company doing a good thing for optics, the students we're trying to reach won't trust it." "You're right. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. The program is funded because you decided to fund it. That's true, and it should be acknowledged. But the origin story matters. People are going to look at this and decide whether it's real based on what they read first." He stopped. "Can we tell the full story? Including the parts that don't make either of us look uncomplicated?" There was a pause on Serena's end. "What parts are you thinking?" "That I walked in uninvited, that nobody believed it would work, that the fix took less than 10 minutes after the diagnosis, and every expensive expert who came before me wasn't wrong to try, they were just using the wrong lens." He paused. "And that I almost didn't stay. I almost just dropped off the part and went home." "Why didn't you?" "A sentence I overheard, and a habit I got from my father." Serena was quiet for a moment. "The journalist is available Friday," she said. "I'll be there. You lead it." The follow-up piece ran the following Thursday. It was longer, messier, more specific, and considerably more human than the first one. The journalist had asked better questions the second time, possibly because she'd had the week to realize that the initial version had been slightly too clean. It included a quote from Owen about the notebook. Not what was in it, but what it represented. And a quote from Roe about reading his diagnostic report, and a paragraph about Lily that Owen had approved and which Lily had reviewed herself and declared acceptable with one suggested revision that he'd incorporated. It also included a photograph that the journalist's photographer had taken at the facility during the installation, Owen standing at one of the workbenches with his toolbox open beside him, not posed, just caught in the middle of something, looking at a piece of equipment. The notebook was on the bench, and you could see it in the background without it being the subject of the photo. He didn't know the photo existed until the article published. He looked at it for a long time when he found it. He looked like his father. Not dramatically, not in any way that required explanation, just the angle of his shoulders, the particular stillness of his hands when they were near something they understood. A resemblance that wasn't visible in mirrors but showed up in photographs when you weren't managing your own expression. He texted the article to his phone from his laptop so he could look at the photo again later. Then he made dinner and didn't think about it, or tried not to, mostly unsuccessfully. The facility's official opening was on a Thursday in January, the week before orientation, and Serena had wanted to mark it with some kind of event. Owen had proposed keeping it small, no press, no speeches, just the core team walking through the space together before the students arrived. She'd agreed with one modification. Frank Castellano was invited, which Owen seconded without hesitation. They stood in the main workshop bay in the early afternoon. Owen, Serena, Roe, Marcus, Frank, Deja from the Educational Access Consultancy, and Paula, the young Blackwood technician who had handed Serena the diagnostic tablet on day one, and whom Owen had specifically asked to be included because she was 26 and building a career and deserved to see what had come from a problem she'd been present for at its start. The space smelled like fresh paint and new equipment, and underneath both of those things, still faintly, the old machine shop smell that would probably never entirely leave. Owen thought that was fine. He thought it was better than fine. Nobody gave a speech. Frank walked the equipment line and asked Roe technical questions about calibration standards. Marcus photographed things on his phone for the Foundation's records. Paula stood at one of the student workbenches and ran her hand along the surface with an expression Owen recognized, the expression of someone imagining the person who would sit there. Serena came to stand beside Owen at the far end of the bay, looking the length of the room. "How does it feel?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. It felt unfinished, which it was, and would be for a long time. It felt uncertain. It felt like the kind of thing that could go wrong in 10 different directions and would require constant, unglamorous maintenance of exactly the kind that didn't show up in articles or photographs. It felt like the beginning of something that might outlast everyone in the room, or might not, and there was no way to know yet which one it was going to be. "Like a system at step 1 of 14, he said. Serena glanced at him. "Not initialized yet." "Not yet." He looked at the workbenches, 22 of them, one per student in the first cohort. "Empty now." "Not empty in a week." "But the authorization is there, like..." Serena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Owen?" "Yeah." "Thank you for not taking the money." He looked at her. She was watching the room with the expression of someone who had built a lot of things and had learned to tell the difference between the ones that were going to matter and the ones that weren't. "Thank you for being the kind of person the proposal could land with," he said. She turned to look at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not sentiment, not gratitude, something less definable than either. "That's the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a building I paid for," she said. He almost laughed. Actually, he did laugh. Not a full one, but enough. She smiled, which was something he'd seen her do only a handful of times over the past months. And each time it looked like something she hadn't entirely planned. From across the room, Lily's voice materialized in his head, unbidden. She would have liked this. He thought she was right. Frank appeared beside them from the equipment line, hands in his pockets. "Workstation 7 has a calibration issue," he said. "Small one, but someone's going to catch it on day 1 if we don't fix it first." Owen picked up his toolbox. "Show me," he said. Workstation 7 had a grounding issue in the calibration sensor. Small, as Frank had said, but the kind of small that compounds. Owen fixed it in 11 minutes while the rest of the group finished walking the facility, and when he straightened up from the bench and looked down the row of empty workstations, he had the particular feeling of a man standing at the edge of something he could not yet see the full shape of. He wasn't sure if that feeling was good or bad. He'd learned over the years that it didn't always matter which one it was. Sometimes you stood at the edge of things anyway, and the only real choice was whether you paid attention while you were there. Orientation started the following Monday at 8 in the morning. Owen arrived at 6:30, which was earlier than he'd told anyone he'd be there, because he'd woken up at 5 and found that sleep was finished with him, whether or not he was finished with it. He made coffee in the small kitchen at the back of the facility, stood in the main workshop bay, in the gray early light coming through the clerestory windows, and looked at the 22 workstations. He thought about a lot of things in those 90 minutes alone. He thought about his father standing in the garage on Mercer Avenue in Galveston on early Saturday mornings, going over his notes before whoever was coming to learn that day arrived. He thought about Rachel, who had stood in the door of that same garage once, early in their marriage, before Lily, before the years that changed everything, and watched his father teach for 10 minutes without saying a word, and then told Owen on the drive home that watching someone teach well was one of the most moving things she'd ever seen. He thought about Lily at the kitchen table with puzzle pieces and the systematic patience of someone who understood intuitively that complex things yielded to careful thinking and enough time. He thought about the Sovereign startup log and those 4 milliseconds, that invisible gap between two systems that couldn't reconcile their information, that had brought everything to a stop, not out of failure, but out of a kind of machine caution that was, in its own way, sensible. He'd spent months now thinking about the parallel without ever quite saying it out loud. That people did the same thing. That the students who were going to walk through that door in 2 hours had often stopped, or been stopped, at exactly that kind of gap. Not broken, not incapable, just unable to authorize the next step because something in the sequence hadn't been reconciled yet. His job, as he understood it, was to rebuild the file, to help them reconcile the gap between what they already were and what they hadn't yet been shown they could become. He refilled his coffee and went to fix a minor issue he'd noticed in the ventilation above workstation 14. They came in at 5 minutes to 8, which told him something. 22 people who'd been told to arrive at 8 and had arrived early, some of them nervous enough to cover it, and some of them not bothering to. He watched them from the doorway of his office, which was a room roughly the size of a generous closet with a window that looked into the main bay, and he observed the way they moved through the space. Tentative in some, curious in others, one young man, Marcus Tate, 20 years old from the 3rd Ward, whose application had described taking apart a broken treadmill at his apartment complex and getting it running again using a tutorial he'd watched 11 times, who walked directly to workstation 7 and stood in front of it with his hands in his pockets, looking at the equipment like it was something he'd been waiting to be introduced to. Roe arrived at 7:58, which was as close to exactly on time as a person could achieve. She had a clipboard, which she did not need but which Owen had noticed she carried when she wanted to signal organization to a room. She set it down on the instructor's bench and looked through the window at Owen, and he raised his coffee cup slightly, and she nodded, and that was the extent of their pre-orientation communication. Owen walked into the bay at 8:12 exactly. 22 people turned to look at him. Some of them had heard of him. The article had run, the story had circulated in certain circles, and some of them hadn't and had come because the program existed and the program was free. And the program was the kind of thing that didn't usually exist for people who looked like them or came from where they came from. He could see both kinds in the room, and he didn't treat them differently in his mind, because the ones who came without knowing the story were, in his experience, often the ones who'd learned not to lean on other people's narratives about what was possible. That was its own form of preparation. He stood at the front of the room. He hadn't written notes. He had the notebook in his hand, closed. "My name is Owen Mercer," he said. "I fix aircraft systems. I've been doing it for most of my adult life, and my father did it for most of his, and between the two of us, we've accumulated more hours inside broken machines than I can accurately count." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you this program will change your life. I don't know your life. What I can tell you is what it's going to ask of you. It's going to ask you to be wrong out loud, in front of people, and to treat that as information rather than failure. It's going to ask you to slow down when you want to speed up, and to ask questions that feel obvious, and to write down what you find even when it seems like the kind of thing you'll remember. You won't always remember. Write it down anyway." He held up the notebook. "This belonged to my father. 30 years of repairs, observations, and thinking. He kept it because knowledge that stays in one head dies with that head. Knowledge that gets written down and passed on becomes something else." He set it on the bench in front of him. "By the time you finish this program, you will each have something like this. Not identical. Yours. Your observations, your methodology, your mistakes, and what you learned from them. That document is your real credential. Everything else is just confirmation." The room was quiet. Not the passive quiet of people waiting for the next thing. The attentive quiet of people who had arrived somewhere they wanted to be and were paying attention because they chose to. Marcus Tate, at workstation 7, had his eyes fixed on the notebook with an expression Owen recognized. He'd seen it in himself in old photographs from his father's garage. The expression of someone encountering an idea that puts language to something they'd already felt but hadn't had words for. "All right," Owen said. "Let's start." The first cohort was not easy. He had not expected it to be. 3 students left in the first month. 1, because the commute was genuinely unworkable and the stipend didn't cover the gap. A problem Owen took directly to Serena, and which was resolved by the second cohort with a transportation assistance fund that should have been built into the original budget and wasn't because nobody had thought carefully enough about what the actual cost of attendance looked like for someone without a car, or with a car that cost money every time it moved. 1 student left because the pace was harder than expected, and the program's policy was to offer support before accepting withdrawal, and they worked with her for 3 additional weeks before she made the decision herself, which was hers to make. The third left for a reason Owen never fully understood. The student simply stopped coming, didn't respond to calls, and when Roe managed to reach him through a family contact, he said only that it wasn't the right time. Owen thought about that one for weeks. He still occasionally thought about it. 19 students completed the 8-month program. The graduation, if you could call it that, was nothing like a traditional ceremony. Owen had resisted the cap and gown format on the grounds that it signaled an end rather than a transition, and what he designed instead was a presentation day. Each student presented their diagnostic notebook to a panel that included Owen, Rowe, Frank Castellano, and two industry representatives that Marcus had sourced through Blackwood's professional network. Not a defense, a conversation. Here's what I found. Here is how I thought about it. Here is what I still don't know. Camille Reyes presented last, which was the order she'd been assigned by the schedule and which turned out to be fitting in the way that unplanned fittings sometimes were. She'd transferred from Frank's program at Houston Technical 4 months in, once the partnership pathway became official, and she brought with her both the certification coursework she'd completed and the particular diagnostic fluency that Frank had been right to identify as exceptional. Her presentation ran 47 minutes. The panel had allotted 30. Nobody stopped her. She documented 9 separate repair diagnoses over the course of the program, each one written in a style that was entirely her own, structured but discursive, precise in the technical details, and honest in the sections where she described being wrong. One entry, midway through the notebook, was a 2-page account of a misdiagnosis she'd made in week 14, the wrong conclusion she'd drawn from the initial data, and the specific moment when she'd understood her error. She'd written, "I found the real problem by going back to what I actually observed instead of what I expected to observe." The gap between those two things was where the answer was. Owen read that line during the presentation and had to look at the wall for a moment. After the panel, Serena pulled Owen into the hallway. "That last student," she said, "Reyes. Camille. I want to offer her a position." "What kind?" "Junior avionics analyst, full-time, my aerospace division." Serena leaned against the wall. "I've had HR review her portfolio. The technical documentation, not the background. Blind review. They came back asking who she was." "She's already got 3 conversations lined up with regional carriers," Owen said. "I know, Marcus told me." Serena paused. "I'm not trying to poach. I just want her to know the option exists." "Tell her yourself," Owen said. "She doesn't need me in the room for that." Serena nodded and then stayed where she was for a moment. 19 out of 22, she said. 3 left. "I know, I'm saying 19 finished. That's an 86% completion rate for a first cohort program with a population that most institutional programs don't target because the completion rates are too uncertain." She put air quotes around that with a dry precision. The industry average for comparable programs is 61%. Owen thought about the student who'd stopped coming, about the 2 weeks he'd spent trying to understand what had gone wrong. 86 isn't 100, he said. "No, but it's real." She pushed off the wall. "Second cohort applications open next month?" 2 weeks. "How many spots?" 30. "If the facility expansion gets approved." Serena looked at him. "It'll get approved. You're the one who has to approve it." "I know." She started back toward the presentation room. "That's how I know it'll get approved." The facility expansion was approved in the spring. 30 students in the second cohort, 44 in the third, which required a second instructor, which required Owen to find someone who could teach the way he needed things taught, which was harder than he'd expected, and easier than it might have been because the answer was already in the room. Marcus Tate, who had graduated from the first cohort and taken a position with a regional maintenance firm, came back 7 months later and asked if there was a teaching role available. Owen looked at him across the desk in the too small office with the window overlooking the bay. Marcus was 21 now, which wasn't old, and he was sitting with the slightly formal posture of someone who had dressed for the conversation. He had his diagnostic notebook in his hands, the one he'd built during the program, and he'd brought it not to show it, but because it was the thing he carried when he wanted to think clearly. "Why do you want to come back?" Owen asked. "Because the job is good," Marcus said. "I'm learning things. The pay is better than this would probably be." He paused. "But I spend about half my day doing work I could teach someone else to do in a week. And I keep thinking about the people in the next cohort who are going to show up not knowing what they're capable of. And He stopped. "I was that person 11 months ago. I don't think I should just move on from that." Owen looked at him for a long moment. Marcus met his eyes without flinching, which was something he'd worked at during the program. He'd written about it in his notebook, actually, a short entry about the difference between confidence and certainty and why he'd spent years confusing the two. The salary is honest work, but it's not aerospace industry scale, Owen said. I know. You'll be teaching people things you learned less than a year ago. I'll be teaching them the things I actually learned, which means I'll remember being where they are. Marcus paused. You always said the best diagnostic mindset was the one that remembered not knowing. I won't have to try to remember it. Owen opened a desk drawer, found a blank employment form, and slid it across the desk. Fill this out, he said. HR processes on Thursdays. Marcus looked at the form. Then he looked up. That's it? Did you want more ceremony? No, Marcus said, almost smiling. No, I really didn't. The years had a way of moving that Owen hadn't entirely anticipated. Not fast exactly, but accumulative, each season adding to the last in a way that made the distance from any given starting point hard to perceive until you turned and looked at it directly. Lily turned 12, and then 13, and then 16, at which point she informed Owen with characteristic precision that she had decided she wanted to study environmental systems engineering, a field that she described as being about understanding how complex natural systems failed and how to design interventions that worked with the failure modes rather than against them. Owen listened to this explanation at the kitchen table on an ordinary Wednesday evening and recognized his father's influence in it so completely that he had to take a moment before responding. That sounds right for you, he said. You're not surprised. No. She looked at him. Because of the puzzle system? Because of all of it, he said. You've always wanted to understand why things stop working. You've just been applying it to different systems than I do. She thought about this with the focused expression he'd watched develop from the age of 8 into something sharper and more particular. Is that what you think about the people in the program? She asked. That they're just applying the same instinct to a different system? Mostly, he said. The instinct is the thing. The application is just context. She nodded and went back to what she was doing, and Owen sat across from her in the kitchen that hadn't changed much in 16 years. The same table, the same window over the sink, different chairs because the old ones had finally given out in year 12, and thought that Rachel would have found this version of their daughter both entirely expected and genuinely astonishing. He thought that about himself sometimes, too. The initiative's fifth-year review was the first one that Owen didn't approach with the anxiety that had shadowed the first 4. Not because the anxiety had been wrong. It had been appropriate and occasionally useful, a kind of pressure that kept him paying attention to things that needed attention. But because by the 5th year, the data had accumulated into something that spoke clearly enough that the anxiety had less material to work with. 273 graduates across 6 cohorts, 89% program completion rate, up from the first cohort's 86. Job placement within 6 months of graduation, 92%, in roles directly related to aviation systems or adjacent technical fields. 11 graduates had gone on to further certification programs. 4 had enrolled in university engineering programs, with the diagnostic notebook serving as a portfolio piece that several admissions committees had said, in writing, was unlike anything they typically received. Camille Reyes had taken the Blackwood position Serena had offered her, and after 2 years, had moved to a senior analyst role. She came back to the facility once a semester to sit on the presentation panels, and she always brought her notebook, and the way she talked to the students about the misdiagnosis entry, the 2-page account of being wrong and what she'd done with it, had become, without anyone planning it, one of the most important conversations the program offered. 3 graduates had returned as instructors, joining Marcus Tate in building the kind of teaching environment where the teacher's most recent experience of not knowing something was close enough to be useful. This was something Owen had read about in educational theory and had also known from watching his father, that the best teachers weren't the most credentialed ones or the most accomplished ones, but the ones who could still remember the specific texture of confusion and had something real to offer on the other side of it. At the 5th-year review, which took place in the conference room on the 43rd floor, the one with the view, the one Owen had first entered carrying a USB drive and a notebook and a quiet proposal that could have gone nowhere, Serena presented the numbers to a board that had grown from 12 to 15 members, one of whom was Frank Castellano, who had joined the Foundation's advisory board in year 2, and whose technical college now had a formal dual enrollment partnership that was producing outcomes neither program would have achieved independently. Patterson, who had been the one to ask about Owen's salary at the first board meeting, sat at his usual position, 3 chairs to Serena's right, and reviewed the documents with the focused skepticism that Owen had come to understand was not hostility, but precision. The particular vigilance of a person who had seen enough promising things fail that he decided the most useful thing he could offer was the hardest question in the room. After the numbers, he looked up at Owen. The completion rate suggests the student selection process is working, Patterson said. What does the selection process actually look like now versus year one? Owen thought about it. The process had evolved significantly. They now had a 2-stage application, a practical component where applicants completed a guided observation task on a simple system, and a conversation with a current student that was neither an interview nor a tour, but something more honest than either. The biggest change is that we added a current student to the evaluation, he said. Not a faculty member, someone who finished the program 6 months to a year ago. Why? Because they can assess something I can't assess as accurately anymore, Owen said. They can tell whether the applicant reminds them of themselves at the point of applying, whether the uncertainty they're presenting is the kind that the program can work with. He paused. I've gotten good at finding capability, but I've gotten further from the experience of not yet knowing you have it. The recent graduates are closer to it. Patterson looked at him for a moment. That's an unusually honest self-assessment. It's just accurate, Owen said. Patterson wrote something down. The meeting continued. But he drove home from the 5th-year review in the same truck, which was now 15 years old and had been repaired so many times in so many specific places that Owen sometimes thought of it as a system that had outlasted its original design through the persistent attention of someone who understood it well. The cracked side mirror had been replaced in year 3, which Lily had pointed out with the satisfaction of someone who'd been noting its absence from the repair list for an unreasonably long time. It was late March, and Houston was in that narrow window between winter's last objections and summer's eventual dominance when the evening air was actually comfortable, and he drove with the windows down and the radio on something he didn't pay attention to and thought about nothing in particular, which was something he'd gotten better at over the years. Lily was home when he arrived. She was finishing her 2nd year of university, studying 2 hours away, but she came back most months for a long weekend, and this was one of them. She was at the kitchen table with a laptop and textbooks, and the architectural ruins of what appeared to have been a significant amount of food at some earlier point in the evening. How was it? She asked without looking up. Good, he said. Numbers were strong. Patterson asked the right questions. Patterson is the one who thought you were idealistic in year 1? He's the one who asked hard questions in year 1. That's not the same thing. Owen opened the refrigerator, found reasonable options, and decided on something simple. He's been asking hard questions for 5 years. The program is better for it. Lily looked up. Did Serena say anything? Several things. About the program specifically. Owen thought about what Serena had said at the end of the meeting, after the board had cleared out, and it was just the two of them and Marcus and Roe reviewing the next year's budget projections. She'd looked at the placement numbers one more time and said, quietly, without making it a moment, that her father would have understood what this was about. That he'd built his business on the same premise. That people who didn't know yet what they were capable of were the best investment available because the return was real and it compounded. He hadn't known what to say to that. He'd said something inadequate, probably. She hadn't seemed to need a better response. She said it's working, Owen told Lily, and that we're expanding the Dallas facility in the fall. Lily nodded and went back to her screen. Owen cooked, and the kitchen filled with ordinary smells, and from outside came the sounds of the neighborhood going about its evening in the unhurried way of places where people had lived long enough to stop performing domesticity and just live it. After dinner, Lily found him in the workshop where he'd gone to finish a repair that had been waiting since Tuesday, a navigation sensor for a Piper owner in Katy, whose aircraft had been grounded for a week. She stood in the doorway the way she'd stood in doorways her entire life, leaning slightly, one shoulder against the frame, watching. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just taken the money?" Owen set down the sensor and turned on his stool to look at her. She was 20 years old and standing in the door of his workshop the way he'd stood in the door of his father's garage. And the parallel was the kind of thing that arrived without announcement and required a moment. "Sometimes," he said. And? And the money would have been good. It would have changed some things. He looked at the notebook, which was on the bench beside him the way it always was. But it would have been a single transaction, something exchanged for something else. This, he gestured at the workshop and beyond it, at the program and its students, and the people who came back and the people who hadn't arrived yet. This is a different kind of thing. It keeps moving. Lily looked at the notebook. Because knowledge moves when you give it away, she said. That's what he always said. She was quiet for a moment. Did he know it would end up here? When he taught you? Owen thought about his father, really thought about him, not the composite memory of lessons and garage smells and handwriting in margins, but the specific person. The man who had charged too little for his work and taken on too many students and kept a notebook because he believed that what he knew mattered enough to preserve. The man who had died before seeing what the notebook had done on a specific Wednesday in a cold hangar in Houston, or what it had done in the years since. I don't think he knew specifically, Owen said, but I think he understood the principle that if you pass something on carefully, you give up control of where it ends up. And that's the point. That's not a risk. That's the whole idea. Lily stayed in the doorway for another moment. I'm going to have a notebook, she said. Not a question. Yeah, Owen said. You already do, actually. She looked slightly confused. Then she understood. The notes she kept for her environmental systems coursework, the observations she recorded from lab sessions, the margin annotations in her textbooks that she'd inherited from him without ever discussing it as an inheritance. She looked at the notebook on the bench. Not the same, she said. No, yours, which is what it's supposed to be. She pushed off the door frame. I'm going to sleep, she said. Finish the sensor. Good night, Lily. Good night, Dad. He heard her footsteps through the house and the particular sound of her bedroom door. She'd always closed it the same way, a specific firmness that was neither a slam nor a click, but something precisely between, and then the workshop was quiet again. Owen turned back to the sensor. The repair was straightforward, a calibration issue, the same fundamental category of problem as half the things he'd fixed in 30 years, each one slightly different in its specifics and identical in its underlying logic. Something that should be reading accurately wasn't. Find out why. Fix the gap. Verify the reading. Move on. He worked steadily in the quiet of the workshop, the kind of quiet that wasn't the absence of noise but the presence of focus, and thought about the 22 workstations that had been empty in January 6 years ago and were never empty now, and the notebooks accumulating in the hands of people who were already beginning to pass on what they'd found, and the gap between what a system was and what it could be when someone finally understood what it was protecting itself from. He finished the sensor at 10:47 p.m. He noted the time, as he always did, wrote the repair entry in his own notebook. System, symptom, diagnosis, fix, outcome, in the shorthand his father had developed and which he'd been using for so long that it had ceased to feel like anyone's shorthand and had become simply the language in which he thought about broken things. He closed the notebook, left it on the bench, where it would be in the morning. Then he turned off the workshop light and went inside, where the house was quiet and the kitchen light was still on in the way he always left it, because some habits outlasted their original reasons and became their own reasons, and because the light in the kitchen at the end of a long day was one of the specific, small, inarguable good things in a life that had more of them than Owen Mercer had ever thought to count.